Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump's response to his tariff case and the president unveiling deals to slash obesity drug prices. The FAA says it is preparing to cut 10% of flights across 40 airports as the government shutdown drags on, while the agency says it's making these cuts. Speaker Johnson refusing to make backroom deals with Democratic leadership. Hopes Democrats take the off-ramp and reopen the government. A Virginia jury awards $10 million to a former teacher who was shot in 2023 by a 6-year-old student. The educator had accused an ex-administrator of ignoring repeated warnings the child had a gun. Russia is reportedly on track to complete its biggest capture of a Ukrainian city since 2023. How the fall of one city could lead to Ukraine losing the entire Donetsk region.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
And thank you for staying with us. President Trump calling his global tariff case the most important in the history of the country. A day after arguments at the Supreme Court, and the president announcing fresh deals to expand coverage and reduce prices of weight loss drugs. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu at the White House. Mari, good afternoon. What is the president saying about his tariff case?
Don, good afternoon. Yes, President Trump is calling his tariff case the most important in the history of the United States. And he's also emphasizing repeatedly the relationship between economic strength and national security, mentioning especially those additional 100% tariff threats that he levied against Beijing and how instrumental they were in what he says was pressuring Xi Jinping to ease the export controls on rare earths earlier this month. Take a look.
I think it's one of the most important cases in the history of our country. So much evolves around tariffs as a defensive mechanism for our country, as national security for our country. So I don't want to really discuss a ground truth. This is so important. If you look at China, and I covered this yesterday, but if you look at China, by putting a large 100% tariff over and above the tariffs they already paid, they came to the table, they talked, we made a wonderful deal for everybody. Our farmers, as you know, with the soybeans at levels that nobody's ever seen before, we were able to make phenomenal deals. If we didn't have the tariffs, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So we thought we did very well yesterday. We hope that we did. I think it would be devastating for our country, but I also think that we'll have to develop a Game 2 plan. We'll see what happens. Most people tell me we did very well legally.
Mr. President, related to that, are you moving forward with any new tariff announcements before a decision from the Supreme Court?
This is the best one, and we can do other things, but they're slow by comparison. Like as an example, with the 100%, I was able to do it instantaneously when we were threatened by the rare earths, as you know, the magnets. And I did it instantaneously. It was a matter of seconds. And it was a matter of seconds that I got a phone call, let's work this out. We would have had not nearly the defense that we had. It would be a shame. It would be somewhat catastrophic for our country.
This is coming just a day after the Supreme Court heard oral arguments considering the legality of President Trump's global tariffs. And while President Trump did not attend, Treasury Secretary Bessent did and said afterwards that he was, quote, very optimistic about the case. Bessent also later told the press that he feels that the tariffs give the president ultimate negotiating authority and that sometimes the best tariffs are the ones that do not actually have to be enforced. And meanwhile, President Trump is now unveiling a deal to lower costs on the obesity drugs Zepbound and Wegovy. The deal with this, which is with two pharmaceutical companies, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, also broadens the coverage of the drugs for both Medicare and Medicaid and lowers the prices that the government pays in those programs. According to the White House, 50% of the U.S. adult population is either obese or overweight, with obesity driving about 50% of healthcare costs in the country. Here's the president and administration officials making the announcement earlier today. Watch.
Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are joining the phenomenal list of the most exciting announcements. These are two companies that behind the groundbreaking weight loss drugs that have helped millions of Americans struggling with obesity live better, longer lives, everything else.
The American public, because of this agreement, will lose 125 million pounds by this time next year. So it is going to have dramatic effects on human health in this country.
Starting doses of oral GLP-1s will cost just $149 a month for everyone. That's roughly 1/8 the cost of the list price today.
President Trump says that pharmaceutical companies make 75% of their profits off of American consumers, while Americans consume only 13% of the world's prescription drugs. And back in May, President Trump signed an executive order directing drug makers to start offering U.S. patients what he calls the most favored nation price for their medicines, meaning that companies will match American drug prices to the lowest paid by other developed nations. Don, back to you.
All right, Mari, thank you. President Trump has announced a deal to lower the price of popular weight loss drugs by nearly 90%. Joining us now to discuss the matter is Lawrence Wilson, reporter for the Epoch Times. So, Lawrence, good to see you, as always. So what does this agreement mean for regular Americans?
Well, for a lot of people who are taking a certain type of drugs, which are called GLP-1 medications, now these are things that treat diabetes, but also weight loss, they're going to be quite a bit cheaper. These are a few drugs that are made by two companies, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. So we're talking about Zepbound, Wegovy, Ozempic. Those are going to be a lot cheaper. As you said, on some doses, up to an 80-90% discount, not quite as much on the injectable medications. But the bottom line is that it's going to mean better health for a lot of people because Medicare and, importantly, Medicaid will be able to get these same discounts. And most states have not covered these drugs for weight loss in the Medicaid program. That could change for a lot of people coming next year.
So, Lawrence, is this pricing for anyone whatsoever who wants the drugs, or are there strict requirements that need to be met?
Well, obviously you need a prescription. These are prescription medications, so it has to be prescribed by your doctor. And if you're a cash paying patient, that means you don't have insurance or your insurance coverage is not that great, maybe doesn't cover these medications, then you can go to Trump RX or other platforms next year and buy them as long as your doctor gives you a prescription for it. Now, in the Medicare and Medicaid programs, it'll be a little tighter. What officials have said is they really want to see Americans' health improve, and so they're looking at people with underlying health problems. So, for example, if you struggle with weight, you have a body mass index that's greater than 27, but you have an underlying condition like you're pre-diabetic, or you've had a heart attack in the past, or you have coronary artery disease, then you would qualify for coverage. If you're extremely obese and people with a body mass of greater than 35%, body mass index, no underlying condition is necessary. So the idea is get people to get the weight off, and then those underlying health conditions will improve.
So what I'm wondering here, Lawrence, is that whether the price is guaranteed, and if so, how long?
Well, White House officials addressed that with reporters earlier today, and they said, yeah, these are pretty much locked in. These companies have signed contracts, but they think it's a system that will work by itself. What the drug makers want more than anything is to have some assurance of the ongoing costs that they'll be able to charge, what the pricing will be. So this deal takes all the tariffs out of their hair, and it makes things simple for them. So yeah, these will be around for a while. And any new medication offered by these companies will be offered at lower prices, the most favored nation pricing.
Is there any indication as to why the president decided to make a deal on this drug, specifically lowering its cost?
Yeah, President Trump talked about that from the Oval Office today. These drugs have been very popular, but very expensive because a lot of people struggle with weight loss. But up until now, especially when they were not covered by most insurances, now some insurances cover them, it was only wealthy people who could afford them. So people who are living in rural areas, like stuck in food deserts, they don't have that much choice about where they go to buy food, for example, or even in urban areas, the same thing. They were priced out of the market. So President Trump wanted to open this up, make it fairer for everyone. And of course, it'll be a big savings for the Medicare program as well.
So, Lawrence, can you speak to the effort that went into this? What did it take to make this deal happen?
Well, President Trump, he offered his opinion on that. It took tariffs. That's what he said. And it truly, some of the drug makers have commented on that in these announcements that, yeah, when you dangle that 100% tariff over a company on one of their best-selling products, then they're motivated to negotiate. Beyond that, a lot of these drug makers have said they recognize that the inequality between the market in other countries and in the United States, where we were paying 500% more or over 1,000% more for these particular drugs, Zepbound and Wegovy, they said we knew that had to change, but we needed something to force the action within the marketplace, not just one drug maker, but the whole marketplace. And Trump's order was like a catalyst to bring that change.
Okay, Lawrence, just a couple more things. What do we need to know about the most favored nation drug pricing policy?
Well, it's very simple. As we heard in the earlier report, it is that the drug makers primarily will offer the lowest available price in the United States. So no more charging $50 for something in the United States and $5 in Europe. Those prices have got to equalize. So that means prices are going to come down here and they're probably going to go up in other developed nations. But there are beyond that some provisions. One is that drug makers agree to offer at least some of their medications direct to consumers. So that bypasses the whole insurance market and is a way for people who don't have insurance to get lower priced medications. They also agree to reinvest some of the savings that they'll realize by this system. They'll reinvest that in the United States. And so we're seeing that. They're making announcements about new manufacturing, new research and development facilities here in the U.S.
Okay, Lawrence, just finally, are we expecting to see more agreements like this with more medications being made cheaper for Americans?
Yeah, this is like the fifth deal that's been announced so far. And every time the president and Dr. Mehmet Oz, they'll say there's more coming. So there are a lot of these under negotiation. Of course, now that it has started, it behooves other drug makers to come into this ecosystem that they're creating. We don't know exactly when those deals will come down, but we do expect this to be an ongoing thing here for a while.
All right, Lawrence, always good to talk to you. Thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
Trade Representative Jamison Greer commented on the ongoing Supreme Court case this morning. He says some plaintiffs could get a refund if the top court rules against President Trump's tariffs. Here's Greer on Fox News earlier today.
So the reciprocal tariffs that were at issue yesterday, I don't have the exact number, but it's over 100 billion, but I think it's going to be less than 200 billion or thereabouts. The court itself signaled that, what do you do in the case that the tariffs are overruled? What do you do with that money? I mean, in some situations, the plaintiffs, specific plaintiffs will get a refund. As for the rest of it, I'll hand that file to the Secretary of the Treasury. He's the one who has all that money in the general.
He added that if refunds are ordered, the government would need to establish a payment process. Greer says the administration would have to work with the courts to set up the details of the payments and to find out what the rights of the plaintiffs are and what rights the government has to that money. Greer added that the Treasury would be responsible for any payment schedules for potential refunds. To discuss takeaways from the Supreme Court hearing on Trump's tariffs, we're bringing in Jonathan Houlihan, President and General Counsel of Remnant Law. So, Jonathan, good afternoon to you. Can I ask you if you got a sense at all as to the leanings of the justices? Do they seem in favor of the president's tariffs, or were they more critical?
Hey, Don, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so fundamentally, the bottom line here is this is a separation of powers issue and really balancing between the executive branch and Congress. Under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress has the power to levy, collect taxes. That's really what the bulk of the discussion was between the justices. It lasted over 2.5 hours. You had, again, Justice Roberts was discussing whether or not this was a tax, and it fell under the power of Congress under Article 1, Section 8. You had Justice Gorsuch really talking about the separation of powers issue, and you had Justice Barrett really looking at, hey, does regulate mean that you can impose these massive tariffs on this vast economic scale using that specific statute? Did Congress intend for that regulate to mean that level of tariffs across the global economy? So you had a lot of different questions. It seems like Justice Alito and Thomas were more in line with the administration's arguments. At the end of the day, it seemed very divided, and it didn't seem to go towards the administration, although the Solicitor General did a great job making the case for the administration.
Jonathan, can you clarify for us exactly regarding what the president's powers are under the International Emergency Economics Power Act, or IEPA?
Sure. Under the president's power under IEPA, he can declare an emergency and really historically it's been used for targeted sanctions on specific countries like Reagan for Libya. President Obama did it for Russia. So his powers have traditionally been limited. It hasn't been delegated to this broad scope of worldwide tariffs. So it's really a new question for the Supreme Court. Does that delegation extend to this extent for tariffs and not sanctions like it's been used in previous administrations?
So talking about IEPA, how do you interpret the fact that the word tariff does not appear?
Well, that shows congressional intent. It doesn't bode well for the administration's position. It shows that Congress intended it to be used for things like sanctions, emergency powers. The predecessor to IEPA was the Trading with the Enemy Act. So it was really for emergencies, used for emergencies for, like I said, with Russia, 2016 with Obama, Libya after the Marine barracks bombing. It's used for the more targeted, specific purposes. That's what that suggests to me. However, I do understand the administration's position, and I do agree with it in a lot of ways that, especially with the fentanyl and the trade deficits and the unfair trade practices, the use in this circumstance, there's a good faith argument to be made for it.
So, Jonathan, earlier you talked about how separation of powers is a major issue in this case. So let me ask you, if the court decides that IEPA allows tariffs, could there still be a chance that it rejects Trump's tariffs on the basis that it violates the law in terms of the nation's separation of powers?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they could rule that, look, in this circumstance, certainly tariffs are appropriate, but they could rule, hey, the broad scope of the use of the tariffs targeting over 100 countries, $90 million, $90 billion, billion dollars, that really exceeds that authority, and Congress didn't intend to delegate it. And that authority is non-delegable when it comes to a major question, major issue of political or economic significance. So they could rule, yeah, they can use it for tariffs. However, it's just too broad in the circumstances based on the facts.
Jonathan, what is your analysis on whether tariffs is a form of taxation, and what did the court say?
Well, previous Supreme Court precedent, courts have always treated tariffs as a form of tax. I believe there was a decision in 1928 where they considered a duty, a taxation, any kind of tariff taxation. And again, that gets back to congressional authority, Article 1, Section 8. So a tariff traditionally in the courts has been considered a form of tax. And that's really what Justice Roberts focused in on. He focused on the taxation piece of it and how that really resides with Congress. And IEPA did not delegate that authority specifically for tariffs.
So what would happen if the court invalidated Trump's tariffs? I mean, would they just end immediately?
Well, it really depends. I mean, they could be considered prospectively. So they could say, look, all the tariffs that have already been collected, we're just going to end the program now. We're going to have a wind down period. And perhaps they just stop collecting and they give 30 days to wind down. They'll give it depends on if the government requests to stay and give it 30 days, 45 days, a reasonable time to kind of wind down the program. There's precedent for that. But all those funds that have been collected, generally, there'd have to be a process for if it's, to get a refund, you'd have to go to the Court of International Trade. If you're a foreign company, if you're, a United States company, obviously there's going to have to be a process to collect those previous funds. But generally, they would wind down the program and give it a little bit of time for it to wind down and not just stop it immediately. They would stop collecting, but anything further wouldn't be collected.
Okay, Jonathan, just one last question. And I do remember President Trump saying, talking about a plan B. So I'm wondering if you have any analysis on would the Trump administration have other avenues to implement tariffs?
No, that's a great question. Yeah, so in the first Trump administration, the Unfair Trade Practices Act was used against China for some of the imbalance in trade deficits. So he has that there's that statutory authority he could use. There's national security concerns, obviously, on the fentanyl. So it's much more limited than the broad tariffs that have been that pushed out on over 100 countries. But there is authority for more targeted statutory authority for trade imbalances, for national security concerns. So absolutely, there's other avenues.
Well, all right, Jonathan, good to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Republicans offer several off-ramps to Democrats in order to end the government shutdown, but Democrats insist on their maximalist demands despite being in the minority. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has more on the story.
I think talks continue to be productive, and hopefully we can get to a resolution. I think we need to get government back up. We need to make sure that people are getting their benefits so they can continue to eat. We need to make sure that airports are open and air traffic controllers are getting paid.
Moderate Democratic senators had shown optimism on a potential deal to end the government shutdown. A vote on a continuing resolution through early next year, a vote on a trio of appropriations bills, and the promise of a vote on the permanent extension of the Affordable Care Act healthcare subsidies.
We're ready, we're willing, we're able to sit down with our Republican colleagues anytime, any place, in order to reopen the government, to find a bipartisan path forward.
Despite the initial optimism, Democratic leadership is still demanding guarantees to extend the Affordable Care Act healthcare subsidies.
I can tell you honestly, I'm less optimistic this morning than I was yesterday, because we were hearing that there were some common sense centrist Democrats who were talking to Republicans, but what I understand is that Chuck Schumer has pulled them back from that. And
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has made it clear that he will not guarantee the passage of any bill through backroom deals or circumvent the regular appropriations process.
Settling for some kind of vague promise about a vote in the future on some indeterminate bill without any definite inclusion in the law, I think, is a mistake.
I'm not promising anybody anything. I'm going to let this process play out. I'll tell you what they wanted. I'll tell you what Schumer and Jeffries wanted. In fact, Chuck Schumer said it publicly and decried that Thune and I would not go in a back room with them and make a four corners agreement on Obamacare subsidies.
Democrats have openly argued that the government shutdown is their only leverage to force their policy priorities on Congress.
The Democrats will tell you that they're feeling emboldened. They're feeling emboldened because they had a few blue state election results. It does not change the fact that they have walked their party off a cliff with no parachute and no path forward.
Republicans have also offered to rehire all federal workers that were laid off during reductions in force during the government shutdown, but Democrats maintain their maximalist demands. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Food stamp recipients will receive more aid this month than first expected. Trump administration officials said in new court filings that households in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, will now get up to 65% of their normal benefits in November. That's up from the 50% level the Department of Agriculture originally announced earlier this week. Officials said the change followed further analysis showing only a 35% reduction was needed to stretch the program's contingency fund. The revision comes amid a court-ordered funding plan during the ongoing government shutdown. The USDA is using $4.6 billion from that reserve to partially fund SNAP. The program normally costs up to $9 billion a month. Now, just moments ago, a federal judge ordered Trump's administration to fully fund food aid for 42 million low-income Americans in November by Friday, blocking its plan to only provide reduced benefits during the government shutdown.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
And welcome to NTD Newsroom. You were just watching President Trump at the White House making an announcement on lowering obesity drug prices and at the same time taking reporter questions and saying that his administration is more affordable than the Biden administration, citing Walmart, saying that 25% lower prices for this year's Thanksgiving compared to before. Okay, next. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will not run for a re-election in the 2026 midterms. She will retire after her current term ends in January 2027.
I have truly loved serving as your voice in Congress, and I've always honored the song of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, the anthem of our city. That is why I want you, my fellow San Franciscans, to be the first to know. I will not be seeking re-election to Congress. With a grateful heart, I look forward to my final year of service as your proud representative.
In a video message posted on X today, Pelosi asked San Francisco to continue leading the way with progress. She said there has been no greater honor than to represent the people of San Francisco. Pelosi was first elected in 1987. She served as the first female House Speaker from 2007 to 2011, and then from 2019 to 2023. She stepped down from Democratic leadership 3 years ago. Pelosi is now 85 years old. During her 4-decade political career, she became an icon of the Democratic Party and one of the most powerful figures in Congress. She was also the driving force behind the 2 impeachments against President Trump. Pelosi's next steps are uncertain, but her exit will lead to a crowded Democratic primary in the midterm election next year. Nancy Pelosi has announced her retirement from Congress. Joining us to discuss is George Carrillo, former Democratic candidate for governor of Oregon and former director of social determinants of health for Oregon. And we have Angie Wong, Republican strategist and political columnist. So, George, I want to start with you today. Could you talk to us about some of Nancy Pelosi's achievements in your view, because she's had nearly 40 years in Congress?
So she is a trailblazer. She is the first woman to hold that gavel. Not only did she hold it once, but she held it twice, and both for 8-year terms. So she's definitely paved the way for women in Congress and also for other minority groups to be able to follow in her footsteps. She has participated in some great movements in the Democratic Party with really championing Obamacare, providing subsidies for Americans to be able to have equitable access to health care. She has been a real trailblazer in this movement of American politics.
I'm going to go to you now. What stands out to you in her political career?
Oh, no doubt. Nancy Pelosi has certainly made the history books beyond just being the first female House Speaker. She has driven a lot of the laws that you and I, face today here in the US. And it's really important to note that she has been planning this exit for some time, and she's leaving on a high note. She just passed Proposition 50 in California. She wanted to leave the House of Congress in the hands of Democratic control. And Prop 50 is going to get her closer, because if Gavin Newsom enacts it and the courts allow him to, the Democrats could gain an extra 5 seats, which could throw the House to Democrat control. But again, she's also leaving at a time when there's a big ideological shift in her party between the moderate Democrats and the far, far left Democrats, who won very big on Tuesday night. So I don't think she wants to play referee in any of this. I think she wanted to leave before the party was going to get a little messy.
So, George, maybe you can continue on Angie's point about timing, because she did specifically choose this moment. Do you think it's the right time, given everything that's happened?
It is the right time. The Democratic Party really needs to find its voice, and it had a major win on Tuesday, and now they have the win behind their back, and they need to continue to move forward. But that needs to happen with new leadership within the Democratic Party. We know that within our own party, we've been calling for new leaders to be able to step up, but we also need leaders that have been in these positions for decades to step aside and let new leadership and new ideas and thoughts to really unite the party. And I believe that right now it's a perfect time, because they're trying to find their voice. I believe the Democratic Party is starting to become more centrist and not so far left leaning, even though there are some very strong leftist progressive movements like what we saw in New York. But as a country as a whole, I believe we will be very strategic in every single race and how we move forward. And now's the time for Congresswoman Pelosi to be able to step down and let that new leadership take the shape of the Democratic Party.
So, Angie, George is saying that the Democratic Party is more more centrist. How do you view this? How do you view how Pelosi's retirement might affect the Democratic Party currently?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with George on that. I see the Democratic Party moving further and further to the left. I mean, we have the rock stars who just won very big in New York and Virginia and other places, right? And yeah, some of them are moderates, but for the most part, Zoran Mondani is the new face of the Democratic Party, along with AOC and Bernie Sanders. They're doing their victory lap right now as we speak. They're all over the airwaves, taking big applause for Tuesday's win. Are they now going to step up into major leadership roles? It looks that way, because AOC is already plotting. She just had lunch with Zoran Mondani, and they were discussing Chuck Schumer's seat, apparently. That's according to one source that just came out about a few hours ago. I think this is a great shift. I think the Democratic Party needs a new soul. They need to understand how to move forward, going forward, because largely they did not win in 2024. So they needed a win in 25, and they certainly need some wins in 26. Whoever the new leadership is going to be, the Republican Party will be ready for them. I'm looking forward to just some life in the Democratic Party. For the most part, a lot of it's just been complaining. So it would be nice to actually see some strategy.
All right, so George, do you think there might be any impact of Pelosi's retirement for the Democratic Party's chances in the 2026 midterm elections?
Well, I believe now we're going to be able to fill that seat. We'll see with what type of Democrat will fill that seat. Again, I believe in, she hasn't been in a leadership role for the past 3 years, but we are seeing leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Catherine Clark, who is the majority whip, or the minority whip, apologies. And, they're really leading the way. And when you look at their record, they're more of a centrist and not as far left leaning. And I believe that they're going to try to unite the party, be able to have more conversations with Republicans, and really be able to get the country back on track. Because I believe that the country right now doesn't necessarily like the far right nor the far left. People are more sort of in the middle, and people want to be able to have a compromise. And I believe that that's the shape that the Democratic Party is looking at, in this last election, what are we looking at is that people are really focused on affordability. They're really focused on the economy. And Democrats in the last election, they lost big because they lost sight of what are the conversations that we're having at the dinner table. And this new leadership structure now is starting to have those more conversations and really being able to work in the middle ground where the rest of the country really lies.
Okay, so Angie, George made some good points there. I'm wondering if you have any responses in light of what he said.
Well, I mean, Nancy Pelosi has always been very, very methodical. She is not one to shoot from the hip. She already has her successor lined up. She probably has the next 5 successors lined up. She is always going to be part of the strategy and leadership of Democratic Party, probably until the day she dies. I think that she's going to be very instrumental moving forward because, as the video is playing right now, one of her legacies is, well, she hates Trump, and she clearly doesn't mind telling the world that she's going to rip up his State of the Union speech in front of everybody. This is what this fight is about. She's going to be playing from behind the scenes. She's going to be the mover and shaker, but from behind the scenes, because largely she understands that Trump's DOJ is also investigating J6 anomalies and possibly some insider trading stuff. So she doesn't want to be part of any of this stuff. That's the only thing I could really add. You know, the Democrat Party is not going to move away from hating on Trump. I think that is a strategy that has worked for them over the years. But I think she's just going to do it from behind the scenes these days.
So, George, can I get your response to what Angie said about Nancy Pelosi will continue to have political influence even after retirement? What do you think is the level of influence that she'll have?
I think she'll have great influence even in retirement. And politics is all about money and donors, and so she still has deep pockets with political donors. And I do believe she probably does have a successor in mind. And she will use her political influence and bank of donors to be able to push that progressive movement, the democratic movement across the country as she sees fit. But I think that right now the Democratic strategy isn't necessarily to hate on Trump. I think Trump's doing that a good job of that on his own. Right now, he's tanking the U.S. economy. Right now, he's weakening the dollar. We're constantly seeing battles in the court system. We are seeing how he has overreach. And I believe that the American public is seeing that. It's not necessarily some secret sauce that the Democratic Party has created. Trump is doing that on his own. And that's what's fueling this Democratic movement. That's the reason why we saw just a sweep on Tuesday. And so that's where I think that the party is headed. And I think Trump is driving his own demise, and which will lead to a complete upset in the midterm election. I believe that we'll win the House and the Senate in 2026.
Okay, Angie, I want to end the conversation with you today. First, your response to what George said, and second, do we know right now anyone who might have a good chance of succeeding Pelosi?
Yeah, there's been a few people that are floating around already. It's only been a few hours. There's a labor leader in San Francisco. I've even heard the name Daniel Laurie being tossed around. He's the new mayor of San Francisco. He's actually pretty good. I know that yesterday, before the news broke, that Representative Aisha Presley of Massachusetts, she was talking about, I had thought she had wanted to go to the upper chambers, meaning the Senate, but I think she might also be looking for more of a leadership role within the House. So those are some of the early names that are floating. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of people jumping in. Nancy Pelosi probably already has her favorites, already has her pick, and her daughter as well. They were also touting that her daughter might jump in for this position. So we're going to see. I'm sure names will be floated. She still, remember, Nancy Pelosi still has another year in her term, so there's going to be a lot of things going around. But yeah, all of this, responding to George, pushes us into a redistricting fight. And that's what Proposition 50 brought on. I know in my state in Florida, we're going to be looking to gain 3 to 5 Republican seats just to give it a net zero on what California may be doing. Mike Johnson came out today during his daily press conference and said, yes, we're going to be looking around the country now, and we're going to play that redistricting game. So that is the next fight that we're going to take on. And it's a simple fight because Democrats, for the most part, had already redistricted as much as they could around the nation. Republicans, this is new to us. This is the first couple, well, it's not the first time we're playing it, but we haven't played it as hard. So I think we could probably, if we played it right, 13 to 15 seats for 2026.
Well, all right, let's leave the conversation there for today. It was a pleasure to speak with both of you, Angie and George. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
A Virginia jury awards $10 million to a former teacher who was shot in 2023 by a 6-year-old student. The educator had accused an ex-administrator of ignoring repeated warnings that their child had a gun. Stay tuned for more news after this break.
There's a whirlwind of emotion and activity going on in this painting. And there's chaos all around and threat from below. The wolves surrounding her, and they're anything but unmoved. They're moving all the time, and we sense that. But this little girl remains unmoved.
She's in quite a perilous situation, but she's completely strong and serene, and she's actually meditating. It was very, very well liked because no matter what culture or what sort of walk of life you're from, I think people, they see it and they immediately understand what that energy, what that message is, and they're drawn to it because everybody kind of needs a little bit of that in their own life, of, you know, the steadfast calmness and something to hold on to. It's definitely an inner peace in the midst of something very chaotic, and for a lot of people right now, the whole world is very, very chaotic. So I guess that's another reason why so many people are very drawn to this.
Senators are working towards a bipartisan deal to fund the government and turn the lights back on. Some anticipate a deal is close to being finalized. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
The latest in the government shutdown showdown, senators are working out the details of a package that could pave the way to reopen the government. Senate Majority Leader John Thune said a mini package should be nearing completion, and that will be the vehicle to carry a short-term funding patch that could last through the end of this year or longer. A minibus refers to a package of bills meant to fund certain aspects of government operations. Now, this package could also be tied to a promised vote on Obamacare, subsidies being extended, but that may or may not make it, and the lack of a guaranteed outcome has left progressives and some Democrats dissatisfied.
It's a vote. Maybe you win, maybe you lose. It goes nowhere. What is important is that we protect the health care of the American people.
Chuck Schumer said it publicly and decried that Thune and I would not go in a back room with them and make a four corners agreement on Obamacare subsidies. And I said, there's no way. That it was never possible or appropriate for that to be handled on a CR on a short.
Senate Democrat leadership has not endorsed this deal, but Republicans just need less than 10 Democrats to get on board with it if all Republicans support it to get it across the finish line. This ongoing debacle is an example of just how broken Congress is, said Jared Golden of Maine, the sole Democrat who voted with Republicans in the House to keep the government open. Despite the fact that Golden represents an area that Trump won 3 times, Democrats are optimistic they'll be able to hold on to a seat.
The last several terms working hard on behalf of the people of Maine. He's going to finish out his term. He will be missed, and we're going to hold that seat.
The self-described moderate announced that he's leaving Congress at the end of his term this year, saying that the increasing incivility and the plain nastiness in American politics led to his decision, also citing the increase in political violence and what that means for him and his family. He said that both parties have become extreme, saying of his own party, "We're allowing the most extreme pugilistic elements of our party to call the shots." Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The federal government shutdown is now the longest in U.S. history, and the impacts are spreading to the skies. The Federal Aviation Administration says it will soon begin cutting flights at major airports if no deal is reached. Here are the details on that.
The Federal Aviation Administration is preparing to cut 10% of flights at 40 major U.S. airports as early as Friday if the government shutdown continues. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says the move is about maintaining safety in the face of staffing shortages.
There'll be frustration. We are working with the airlines. They're going to work with passengers. But in the end, our sole role is to make sure that we keep this airspace as safe as possible.
According to the FAA, the reductions are meant to ease pressure on air traffic controllers who have now gone more than a month without pay.
But we do recognize that the controllers have been working fastidiously for the last 5 weeks with this huge burden over their head of lack of compensation. And we are starting to see some evidence that that fatigue is building in the system in ways that we feel we need to work towards relieving some of that pressure.
Duffy says they have identified 40 locations where controllers are under high pressure. He did not say which airports were on the list, but the plan could affect thousands of flights across the country, from New York and Chicago to Los Angeles and Dallas. Aviation analysts say that could mean as many as 1,800 canceled flights and more than 260,000 lost seats. Major airlines are trying to assess how the cuts will affect their operations. United Airlines says long-haul international and hub-to-hub flights will continue, but smaller regional routes could be impacted. Frontier Airlines warned travelers to book a backup ticket in case of cancellations. Secretary Duffy says he knows this decision will inconvenience travelers.
I'm concerned about disrupting people's travel. We're coming into a weekend, but we had to have a gut check of what is our job. Is it to make sure there's, minimal delays or minimal cancellations, or is our job to make sure we make the hard decisions to continue to keep the airspace safe?
Tens of thousands of flights have been delayed since the shutdown began because of widespread air traffic control shortages.
ICE authorities in Houston arrested 1,505 alleged criminals, including illegal immigrants and some really serious offenders, during a 10-day operation. Joining us now is Ammon Blair, a senior fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He specializes in border security and immigration policy with over 2 decades of experience as a U.S. Border Patrol agent and U.S. Army officer. Ammon, first of all, thank you for joining us today. So given your experience as a Border Patrol agent, just how unprecedented is this 1,505 alleged criminals arrest in just 10 days?
Yeah, actually, it should be happening almost every single day, to be honest. If you break that down, I think it was from October 22nd to October 31st. In those 9 days, it was a little over 100 people per day in the general Houston area. I think if President Trump and Tom Homan and Department of Homeland Security focused their efforts on red states as opposed to all the sanctuary areas, they would actually be able to see this number grow exponentially. This is unprecedented given what we had previously, but unprecedented ish, I guess you could say, light. If you imagine that on any given day under the Biden administration, we had thousands upon thousands coming in and flowing into the United States. We had over 10 million illegally come into the United States under the Biden administration. I remember as a Border Patrol agent that the largest group that I ever encountered with myself and a couple other partners was a little over 1,000 there in Stark County. And that is just in one day. So yes, this is great. This is a great first step. There are many more steps that could be taken so that we could get this on a daily basis.
So what are the next steps then that you are referring to?
Yeah, sure. To give you an example, Texas DPS, our state law enforcement agency, just signed the Task Force Model Agreement. That was on November 3rd. That agreement has been around since the Trump administration came in. It's taken this much time to get our state agency in a red state of Texas to actually sign an agreement with ICE. We have over 2,700 law enforcement agencies in the state of Texas. However, a little over 50 of them have signed a task force model. So we have that as a beginning, yes, but we have a lot further to go. So if each county, imagine if each of those 2,700 agencies signed an agreement, worked proactively in a task force model with ICE and all of our federal partners and conducted operations such as these, taking criminal illegal aliens off our street, how much more would we get? Just in one state alone.
So, Ammon, if you take into consideration all the factors here, what would you say is the biggest factors or obstacles or challenges that's preventing immigration officers from carrying out these deportation efforts?
Yeah, first and foremost, like I said in the very beginning, the sanctuary policies in certain cities where they are actively thwarting law enforcement efforts, whether that's Border Patrol or ICE, to include our judiciary, who thinks that they can dictate how we conduct immigration operations. The next one I would say is actually local law enforcement assistance. Look, there's only a certain amount of federal agents and also ICE officers throughout the entire country. That means that we're going to heavily rely on, or need to rely on, local law enforcement. If you look across the United States right now, I just pulled up the numbers. Any of your audience can actually pull these up. There was only a little over 500 law enforcement agencies nationwide that have actually signed a task force model agreement. So that means that there's around a little over 10 or 11 agencies per state that have actually signed a proactive agreement with ICE. So once again, this is just a start, but man, we have a lot of work to do.
Those bottlenecks.
I'm sorry, you cut out.
Sorry, I was just asking, how do you undo those bottlenecks that you just mentioned?
I think it's information. I think a lot of law enforcement agencies, when we go around and speak, they have this whole idea and concept. One, that immigration is not their priority or shouldn't be their priority. That's a federal priority. So that's one issue that we need to get over. Transportation is also another bottleneck. The idea of, okay, once we have this illegal alien, how do we transport them? How do we house them? Where do we take them for detention purposes or transport them using our limited resources as a county sheriff or local law enforcement? And so really, all these bottlenecks have actually been looked over, addressed, and figured out in Florida. Florida's immigration enforcement operational model, the manual is actually published, has figured out how to overcome every single one of these bottlenecks. They have a transportation plan. They have a person that leads an actual immigration enforcement model across the state. Every single, I think over 260 of their law enforcement agencies in Florida alone have actually signed the task force model. So you name it, every agency that the state has that can sign the model itself, as well as every single organization, to include even their game wardens, are in this game. And so Florida, if we want to look at models or ways to break through these bottlenecks, Florida has actually shown us how to do it.
All right, so Ammon, if you could, can you address to some of the criticisms that has emerged in light of all this? So the Migration Policy Center cites data showing that about half of ICE detainees in August were people without criminal convictions or charges. The rest did have criminal convictions or charges. What would you say to those concerned that this operation isn't targeted enough?
To be honest, I think it should target illegal aliens. And that's it. If you are illegally present in the United States, regardless if you have an extra criminal charge against you, whether that's a felony charge or another charge, you are illegally present inside the United States and therefore must be removed. Look, this is a war for our citizenship. The whole idea and concept of what is a citizen versus what is a foreign national or even a legal resident. What are your rights and responsibilities of an illegal alien who is not here, who is present, unlawfully present here in the United States? What is your rights and responsibilities of maybe you are a legal resident versus what is your rights and responsibilities of a citizen? I think that is really, at the end of the day, this is a war against the whole idea and concept of citizenship and sovereignty. And so that's why we keep hearing in media this attack saying, I should only target those who have criminal records. Well, every single illegal alien has a criminal record. They are here illegally. They were not admissible when they came through the ports of entry, and they must be removed.
Okay, Em, and just to wrap up, if you could just address one more concern that some people may have, and that argument is that these illegal immigrants, they're contributing to the U.S. economy.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have made it so that we are dependent on foreign labor inside the United States. This is going to take a whole society approach. We need to realize that we need to become self-reliant and not rely on cheap foreign labor. Cheap goods is skyrocketing. We are now at a trade deficit with the world, and we can't even feed ourselves. We look at our farms and ranches and other areas of work, and we're relying on foreign labor. We have unintentionally built a caste system, and it's time to destroy that caste system, reestablish our constitutional republic, and not rely on cheap labor. Because look, at the end of the day, we're also exploiting them. Not only are they exploited by the Mexican cartels and other transnational organizations, they're exploited by large corporations, and they're exploited by us as the American people as a cheap foreign labor.
Okay, Em, and very strong points you made today. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
A federal judge yesterday ordered authorities to improve a Chicago area immigration facility. The move comes after a group of detainees sued, alleging they were being kept in inhumane conditions.
It's not just that people are subjected to these inhumane conditions, it's that puts them in an inherently coercive situation where they are denied access to basic amenities. They naturally want to get out of the facility, and at the same time, they're denied access to their lawyers.
The order will be in effect for 14 days. It requires officials to provide detainees at an ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois, with a clean bedding mat, sufficient space to sleep, and some basic amenities. An attorney for plaintiffs celebrated the order for improving the conditions of the facility and preventing detainees from unknowingly signing away their rights. Mayor-elect Mamdani says if ICE agents or anyone else breaks the law, they will be held accountable. This while the Department of Homeland Security says many video clips of ICE agents show actions done in self-defense. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the details.
In response to a question, New York Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani shares a message to ICE agents and, quote, everyone across the city.
Everyone will be held to the same standard of the law. If you violate the law, you must be held accountable. And there is sadly a sense that is growing across this country that certain people are allowed to violate that law.
On Sunday, Mamdani also shared his view on a possible National Guard deployment.
I agree with Police Commissioner Tisch that we do not need the National Guard in New York City.
The Department of Homeland Security had been reporting a 1,000% increase of attacks on ICE agents. However, recently they're now saying that number is an 8,000% increase. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons told Fox News that U.S. leaders need to tone down the rhetoric.
And the problem is so many on the left, and there are so many people opposed to us, that a lot of the tactics that you are seeing are in self-defense. So what I say to any elected official that doesn't like immigration action right now is to work with us. You know, tone down the rhetoric, stop putting targets on ICE agents' backs.
And Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says that this October, a record was broken related to border crossings. Noem says, quote, history made the lowest border crossings in October history and the 6th straight month of zero releases. This is the most secure border ever. In a document, the DHS reports that this October broke the previous record by 29%, which was set in 2012. Jason Blair, NTD News.
Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff says a new country will be joining the Abraham Accords. Witkoff touted the agreement during a business forum in Florida.
Well, look, Abraham Accords are big. I'm flying back to Washington tonight because we're going to announce tonight another country coming into the Abraham Accords tonight.
Witkoff declined to say which nation will be joining the peace agreement. However, a senior White House official said Kazakhstan will be the latest country to join. Kazakhstan's president is scheduled to meet with President Trump alongside 4 other Central Asian leaders at the White House today. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel in 2020 under the Abraham Accords established by President Trump. Morocco normalized ties with Israel later the same year. Trump has repeatedly said he wants to expand the accords that he brokered during his first term in the White House. President Trump will host the leaders of 5 Central Asian nations today at the White House. His administration seeks to gain influence in a region long dominated by Russia and increasingly courted by China. The talks take place amid intensifying competition for Central Asia's vast mineral resources. Western nations are seeking to diversify supply chains away from Moscow and Beijing. The U.S. is pursuing new partnerships to secure critical minerals, energy supplies, and overland trade routes that circumvent its geopolitical rivals. Launched in 2015, the so-called C5+1 platform brings together the United States and the 5 Central Asian states, including Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, to advance cooperation on economic, energy, and security issues. Their leaders will also attend a dinner with Trump at the White House this evening. And new concerns about China reach in suppressing unfavorable media coverage. The Epoch Times and NTD, 2 American media companies known for exposing human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party, were recently denied access to key Asia Summit events. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the incident, which happened at the recent ASEAN and APEC summits.
An Epoch Times reporter traveling with the White House encountered repeated roadblocks in accessing key press events in Asia, the latest in a pattern of interference linked to communist authorities in Beijing. Epoch Times is NTD's sister media. Both companies were ultimately denied entry to the ASEAN and APEC summits. They were the only outlets denied access despite having received pre-approved press credentials. This occurred after a series of twists and turns involving communications discrepancies, unlikely tech glitches, failed promises of press credentials, sudden reversal of statements, and passing the buck. Epoch Times editor-in-chief Jasper Fokkert said in a statement, "The Chinese Communist Party is an enemy to freedom of the press." He called it deeply concerning that the regime could influence international bodies like the United Nations and ASEAN to block access for what is now America's 4th largest newspaper. Headquartered in New York, the Epoch Times has long been a target of the Chinese regime, from threats and intimidation of advertisers to physical obstruction of reporters. In 2000, its first journalists in China were arrested, with several sentenced to a decade in prison. More recently, UN officials barred its reporters from entry in September. The campaign has intensified. Hackers impersonating Epoch Times staff have threatened U.S. agencies. The paper has received bomb threats, and an envelope containing white powder arrived at its headquarters in October. Travis Gilmore, White House correspondent for the Epoch Times, arrived in Malaysia 2 days before President Trump joined the ASEAN summit. Gilmore had pre-approved media credentials. However, when embassy and White House staff went to retrieve the credentials for media personnel, ASEAN officials informed them that Gilmore's profile needed updating. Repeatedly, Gilmore said he found himself in the same cycle, being told to come back and pick up the press pass later, only to find nothing when he returned. On October 26th, the ASEAN staff told Gilmore he got a pass approval, but the credentials never materialized. Mariotsu and Chen Lei, White House correspondent and videographer for NTD, faced a similar situation when they arrived at their hotel in South Korea ahead of the APEC summit. Inside the hotel, a reserved media table at the press filing center bore the NTD logo, but APEC staff members restricted their access and stated they didn't have the pair's credentials. The media liaison team blamed a mix-up for what happened and told Otsu they had found her media pass, only to walk back the statement within minutes, saying the earlier message was sent in error. Neither APEC nor ASEAN returned the Epoch Times request for comment on the article about the incidents. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Turning point came to Auburn University yesterday. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Eric and Lara Trump, and political commentator Benny Johnson were the key speakers. And one unexpected visitor phoned in. Take a look.
Charlie and Erica, these are 2 incredible people. And Eric, I've spoken to her often. She's just a spectacular person. And she's going to start where Charlie left off. And we should never allow this to happen. One of the greatest people we've ever known, and was so responsible for our win. And we love Charlie's looking down on us right now, all of us. And Erica, you're there someplace, and you just take care of yourself. We're with you all the way.
One thing about Charlie, he was waking up millions of young people at a time. He was waking them up because he was telling the truth. And you know what? He lost his life for it. He lost his life because he was telling the truth. He was never afraid of it.
What is America? America, as defined by our founders, is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you are the ones who embody all of those things.
Neville Arena was packed with people waving flags and cheering Charlie Kirk as the speakers took the stage. The event aimed at rallying young conservatives around themes of free speech, faith, and family values. Organizers described the event as a tribute to Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk and his ongoing mission to energize the next generation of conservative leaders. Eric and Laura Trump discussed their family life, faith, and the challenges of today's political landscape. The evening wrapped up with a student Q&A covering topics such as Israel, free speech, and pro-life issues. Many in attendance said they left inspired to carry on the message of civic engagement and conservative activism shared throughout the night.
A baby hippo at the Berlin Zoo has quickly become a little star just 1 week after its birth. The little one seems to be growing well in one of the world's most famous zoos. Sometimes paddling furiously and other times taking big leaps, the baby hippo swims seamlessly after his mother in the lagoon. According to the zoo, it was an important milestone for the calf when it went swimming for the first time at the beginning of this week. While the little one tried to conquer deeper parts of the water, its mother gently pushed it towards more shallow parts of the lagoon. The zoo director said he was amazed to observe the natural process of the upbringing.
The last thing I see again and again on a day like today is how naturally these young animals grow up with their mothers. There are no books for expectant hippopotamus mothers on how to do it right, how to learn more, or whether they need to practice. And there is no nursery for the little ones where they can learn how to do it right with their mom. Instead, it all happens naturally. It's in their genes.
The calf was born on September 28th and has not been given a name yet. Apart from the mother and calf, the little one's father, aged 13, and a senior hippo, aged 50, also form part of the Berlin Zoo.